Been thinking a lot this week about what it means to be a believer in Jesus Christ while living in a world that does not believe in Him. It's not to say that everything in the world is bad and everyone who's not a Christian is a gross sinner. We certainly have plenty of gross sinners in the church, right? Right? All right. Let's own it, people, own it. Our world, even in its brokenness, is full of beauty. Just like I was sharing with you, our trip to Oregon, it was fantastic. We had to leave last Saturday, and as we came south, we came along Upper Klamath Lake. If any of you have traveled up in southern Oregon, you know what I'm talking about. And it's just amazing. 4 years ago when we were there for Julie's wedding, and we came down on that same trip, up alongside the mountains, because you're right on the edge of the lake, up alongside the mountains that went up at a steep angle, there were these swarms of they were fractal insects. I don't know what it was, but they were doing this swirling thing, and the light was shining in them, and there were thousands of them in every group. I mean, there were probably millions as we drove down. And they all knew how to fly. It was just the most amazing thing. It's like the church could learn a few things from those bugs, you know. The world is full of beauty in spite of its brokenness. Good values and traits can still be found in the human race, like the hospice nurse I read about this week who adopts terminally ill babies. That's what she loves to do, is just adopt babies that nobody wants because they're going to die and maybe they can't speak or communicate. My mom was that kind of person. She worked as a nurse's assistant in the pediatric unit, and she was the one who took care of the ones that nobody wanted, and she would hold them for hours. She would sing to them. She would write poetry and give it to their parents, and before she passed away, she had adopted 3 of them. There's still good things found in human beings. Or the 30 strangers who heard about the 83-year-old Jewish woman who had nobody at all to attend her funeral. She had passed away, and they all showed up and became part of the memorial service. Random acts of kindness is the term we use. Exceptional stories of goodness in a world of conflict and pain and death. But for those who are followers of Jesus, kindness and positive influence should be neither random nor exceptional. Ephesians 5:8 says this: "You used to be like people living in the dark, but now you are people of the light because you belong to the Lord." Think about that. You are people of the light. Why? Because you do good things? Because you have gotten rid of all the bad stuff in your life? No. You are people of light because you belong to the Lord. It's our relationship with God that makes us people of the light. So act like people of the light and make your light shine. Make your light shine. So act like people of the light and make your light shine. I was thinking about what I could do for August, and who knows, it might come up later on too, in terms of a sermon series, and I thought of the metaphors of the Bible. The Bible's full of metaphors, isn't it? And unfortunately, in Bible times, they didn't have English teachers to tell the writers not to mix their metaphors, but oh well, we learned from that, even though my English teacher would threaten me within an inch of my life if I ever did mix my metaphors. But Jesus did, so it's okay. It's okay. And today I'm going to share with you 2 great metaphors that are familiar to most Christians that Jesus gave us. 2 lasting metaphors to help us understand His vision for our lives in this world, our lives of light in this world. Many things about the first century we don't really understand or relate to. There's all kinds of things that when we read it we go, huh? What's that about? I don't understand that. It might be a word, or it might be something that happens in society. But when it comes to these 2 things, we all get it. We all understand it because they've been part of human experience from the beginning of human experience. Salt and light. Who doesn't use salt? Come on. Even you guys who are on salt-restricted diets, you use salt. It's there. I know it is. And light, well, there you go. We all use salt and light. So Jesus talked about salt and light in Matthew 5. He started out, we understand this was like maybe the initial sermon that he gave at the beginning of his ministry. It depends on which gospel you read, but certainly in Matthew, that's the way it comes across. And he's just finished giving us the Beatitudes, we call them. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek and those who hunger and thirst after righteousness. And of course, every Friday night here we have Celebrate Recovery. I haven't been away that long. I got it. We have Celebrate Recovery, and they talk about those principles of the Beatitudes and how they help us reform and reshape our lives. They give us not only inspiration, but they give us a model for a better life. How to overcome the darkness and the sin in our lives. So he's just given us that model of what a good life looks like. And then he says this. I'm going to read it. It's not fully on your screen, but we're going to go through this as we work through the message today. But this is what he says. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Two metaphors of grace, two metaphors of faith. You are like salt, he says. This is the contemporary English version. You are like salt for everyone on earth. But if salt no longer tastes like salt, how can it make food salty? All it's good for is to be thrown out and walked on. So I was thinking about salt, and I thought I'd look up a little bit of information. I was shocked to find out how much information there is on salt. There's a lot. Look it up on Wikipedia or the Salt Institute of America or whatever. There was even an article in Time a few years ago that had the history of salt. So here's a few things I learned. Salt was used as money, as currency in ancient times. It was very expensive, I think, to produce and to transport. You've heard of the phrase, not worth his salt, right? It's not worth his salt. Some of you have. I mean, in my old age, I've heard of that term, In the 20th century, we used it. I don't know about the 21st century. But it actually comes from the Roman practice of paying the soldiers in salt. They actually would give them a block of salt. They could trade it in currency. And if the soldier had been slacking off, the captain or the centurion or whoever paid him might cut his block of salt in half because he wasn't worth his salt. You ever heard of the word salary? Guess where that comes from? Because that's what they got. That was their salary. So when you get salary, would you like salt for your salary? Not your celery, your salary. I also read that in the 6th century, certain Moorish traders actually would trade salt for gold at a 1-to-1 rate. Now here you go. This is 26 ounces of salt. And if I had met a Moorish trader, I could have in my hands, I could say, here's my salt, I want the gold. He would give me, maybe close to $30,000. At today's rate, a pound of salt is worth a little over $20,000. Wow. We sure missed out, didn't we? and also the way that salt was mined or used or extracted was different in those days. They didn't have the same process as we do. I mean, there were evaporation processes, I believe, but when Jesus says if it loses its flavor or its savor, it's good for nothing. Well, it's odd because of our common knowledge of chemistry, we realize that salt is one of the most stable elements in the whole world. It doesn't lose its flavor. But he's not talking about the salt itself. It was more the form that it came in. And how the salt, they would get the salt from the marshes and maybe the moisture would get on it and leach the salt out. And then all they had was this useless mud or something, and they just put it on the roadways because it wasn't good for anything. It wasn't good for agriculture. It left behind some different elements that would keep the plants from growing. Or maybe unscrupulous traders would dilute the salt with gypsum or something like that, so it became worthless. So when Jesus says, you are the salt of the earth, what does he mean? This isn't hard. In fact, Diana filled in all the blanks on the way to church. She said, well, salt is good for this and it's good for that, you know. And then I got to church and realized on your outline, I had filled in all the blanks. Well, she showed me that I'd filled on all the blanks. She said, did you want to do that? I said, no, I want them to think about it. So we reprinted them. You don't have the blanks filled in. But she got it right. She started right out, and she said, salt is a preservative. That's it. And in many of these ways that we think of salt being used for, we have similar things in what Jesus had in mind when he said we're the salt of the earth. It's a preservative. It's been used for thousands of years as a food preservative for fish and for meat. Has the ability, this great ability to retard or destroy organisms by removing the moisture. See, those organisms, those bacteria, they can't grow if there's no moisture. And so it just sucks all the water out. I remember when my youngest daughter came back from Iceland on one of her return trips from going to school there. In Iceland, one of the main staples of diet is fish. Go figure. And they have this horrible product. It's like dried salted fish. You open the package and you want to run down the street. You don't even want to be around it. And she's sitting there chewing on that stuff. How can you put that nasty stuff into your body? But they like the salted dry fish. It wasn't going to kill her. It was going to kill me with the smell. And God's people are a spiritual preservative in a rotting world. So if you take meat, or if you take fish, or you take different kinds of food, and you know the right way to do it, you can preserve food substances with salt, and it doesn't rot, it doesn't get moldy, it isn't destroyed. It's good for eating, good for nutrition. And when Jesus said you're the salt of the earth, part of what he had in mind, I think, was that we are actually a spiritual preservative in a world that is just going to hell in a handbasket. It goes all the way back to Abraham in Genesis. Remember the story of Abraham meeting the three travelers, you know, and they come and they have lunch with him, and they say, Sarah's going to have a baby. She's 99 years old, and she laughs, and they say, why did you laugh? And she says, I didn't laugh. I mean, how can you lie to God? But she did, you know. But they didn't mind. They just said, you're going to have a baby, so who's going to have the last laugh? You know, it won't be you. So they went through all of that, and then Abraham accompanies them as they go on their way to Sodom. And two of them go on, and one stays behind. And he begins to tell Abraham. Evidently, this one was God. It says he was the angel of the Lord. And he says, this is what I'm going to do to Sodom. I'm going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah because of their wickedness. So Abraham, he understood this preservative concept. And he starts working. He starts bargaining with God. He says, well, Lord, if there's 50 people or if there's 40 people, will you destroy the city? And God says, no. And he gets down in chapter 18 of Genesis, verse 32. Abraham said, please don't get angry, Lord, if I speak just once more. Actually, he spoke 2 or 3 more times. But he says, suppose you find only 10 good people there. For the sake of 10 good people, the Lord told him, I still won't destroy the city. People who follow Jesus, people who are believers in Christ, their very presence in this world is a preserving and a safety net for the world. The presence of God-honoring, love-filled believers counteracts the downward spiral of a society filled with moral decay and death. You and I make a difference just by living in this world as believers. Do you know that? That's what Jesus had in mind when he talked about salt. Maybe the second thing he had in mind was that salt is a flavoring. Because he talked about it losing its flavor. It's a flavoring. It's a seasoning. Salt is good. He says, but if the salt loses its salty taste, you can't make it salty again. So be full of salt and have peace with each other. I like that. Salt brings out natural flavors, doesn't it? You don't want too much of it. And I know doctors want us to use less salt, but even watermelon can taste better with a little salt on it. How many of you use watermelon on your salt? Yeah, you weirdos. I've tried it. I like it, but I like the sweet too. And I don't want to, I'm sorry, I don't want to eat corn chips, tortilla chips, potato chips. I don't want to eat those things without salt on them. I don't want to have salad that has no seasoning. I don't even want chocolate chip cookies that don't have a little bit of salt to bring out the flavor. Dinah knows how to do that. Of course, she buys unsalted butter, but the only reason for that is because the recipe has a certain amount of salt in it. This world is a pretty bland and distasteful place without the flavors of grace that God puts in our lives. We're here to bring out the taste of God's goodness, to make life more palatable. Galatians 5, I've been reading the letter to the Galatians this week. Galatians 5 talks about the fruit of the Spirit. God's character lived out in our lives. And how His character gives seasoning to the society in which we live. Love and joy and peace and patience and gentleness and goodness and mercy and self-control. Who wouldn't love the taste of these things if they're authentic? When Jesus said, "You're the salt of the earth," He's talking about how we flavor the earth. We bring something that is desirous to the society that we live in. Third, maybe He had in mind the fact that salt is an antiseptic. Just as it kills the organisms when you're preserving food, it also kills organisms that make us sick. Gracious words, Proverbs 16 says this, "Gracious words are a honeycomb, sweet to the soul and healing to the bones." I read that in ancient times, newborn babies were rubbed in salt. And Dinah said, "Why? Why would you do that?" Well, because in ancient times, they didn't have pristine hospitals with highly trained technicians and all that stuff. They just pulled that baby out no matter how they could get it out. And sometimes babies didn't come out, completely unscathed, shall we say. And so they rubbed salt on it as an antiseptic, actually. If you have a wound, you can sanitize it with salt. That's terrible, isn't it? But it works. It's effective. It's an antiseptic. It fights infection. And so gracious words, it says, are a honeycomb, sweet to the soul. Our words, our lives, our presence in the world around us can bring healing to the world around us. That's what God wants to do through us, through our presence in this world. And then fourth, it creates thirst. It creates thirst. They say you can lead a horse to water. How many of you ride horses? Come on, Kelsey, raise your hand. There's some horse riders here. You can lead a horse to water. You can lead a horse all kinds of places, but a lot of times you can't make him do anything, but you certainly can't make him drink. But the way to get a horse to drink, they say, is to give him a salt lick. Starts licking the salt, then he gets thirsty, then he'll drink. Well, isn't it the same way with our lives in the world? Our presence in the world creates a desire for God and for godliness if we're living as God intended for us to live. One verse in Peter that Peter writes is, he says, "Be ready to give an answer to whoever asks you why you have hope." See, when our lives are filled with God, it makes people thirsty for God. It makes them desire something they didn't know they needed or they wanted. Some of you have seen the film The Case for Christ, the story of Lee Strobel and his journey from atheism to becoming a believer. And his wife became a Christian because there was a lady in her apartment who she wasn't a Bible worker. She didn't give Bible study. She just was a believer in Jesus who didn't mind letting her light shine. Oh, wait, we're on salt. Didn't mind being salt to the world. And she just was this kind person who invited her to church, and she became a believer. She got the desire through a person who was the salt of the earth, spiritually. People see you and me, how we live, how we deal with trouble and disappointment, how we love and seek God. We are God's salt to make them desire Him. Salt. Jesus said we're the salt of the earth. He said you're the light of the world. Mixing the metaphors. I like it because somebody came up with a graphic on the screen of a light bulb with a salt shaker at the end. That's pretty cool. Did you know that? Did you see that? I mean, you sat here this whole time and you didn't even know that that's what it was, right? Well, this is what he says in Matthew 5:14, according to the Message. You're here to be light, bringing out the God colors in the world. God is not a secret to be kept. Light is a part of nature, of the nature of life and creation. It's always been a part of our existence. And so Jesus hit it right on the mark when he used this metaphor to talk about the growth of his kingdom. How are we like light? What are the effects of living in the light of God? Well, first of all, light, you can read this in Genesis 1:1. Light chases away the darkness, doesn't it? It dispels the darkness. This verse in Isaiah 9:2, which is actually a part of a messianic prophecy, says, those who walked in the dark have seen a bright light, and it shines upon everyone who lives in the land of darkest shadows. Light drives away darkness. Have you ever experienced how heavy darkness can feel? Have any of you ever gone to into caverns? The Vacation Bible School is about caves and spelunking and so forth. Anybody ever been to what's the one in New Mexico? Carlsbad Caverns. You ever gone down in those caverns and then they turn the lights out? Maybe they don't do that anymore because OSHA won't allow it. I don't know. But I remember when I was a kid, we went in Virginia to some caverns, Lou Ray Caverns, I think they were called. And the guide turned out all the lights. It felt heavy. It was so black. I mean, you could see nothing at all. And then she lit a candle, just one candle. It was like the whole place lit up. It just took that heaviness off. One candle can lift the oppression. Or driving at night. That gets kind of crazy. When there's no moon, there's clouds, everything's dark and you're driving and it's pressing in on you, and you drank your last Coke or coffee 10 hours ago. You're getting ready to fall asleep. It's just pressing you out. And then you see just this tiny sliver of light on the horizon, and it wakes you up. It kind of perks you up. The darkness gets lifted. The darkness of this world is crushing the life out of the human race. Every day in the news, this week I think every single day there was a story about either a wrong-way crash or some horrific automobile crash in which somebody got killed here in Southern California. Every day in the news there's stories that weigh us down to despair. Stories about the inhumanity of one person to another, about the political corruption in systems of government, about the destruction of life and property through war and through natural disasters. The darkness is pressing us down. Jesus said, I put you in the world to help lift that oppression, to help bring light. Our lives lived in the light of faith in Jesus helped chase that darkness away. You didn't know that you were that important, did you? And then this goes right along with lifting the darkness or chasing it away. When the light chases the darkness away, it reveals what is there. It reveals what's hidden. 1 Corinthians 4:5 says, He will bring to light what is hidden in darkness and will expose the motives of the heart. Light not only lifts the darkness, it shows us what is present. Early in the morning, this week particularly, but often I do this when the weather's good, I go out on the back patio for my time of meditation and reading, and it's dark. It's dark. My little dog, I try to keep her from getting up on the chair before I get the blanket laid down. She just doesn't know a sequence of things. But Like, let me get the blanket down, and then you can get up and lay between my legs as I sit here and read my devotionals and so forth. She curls up there, and I can't really see her much. Just a little bit of light from the kitchen, comes out. But if I look to the side of the patio in the neighbor's yard, all I can see is silhouettes, nothing else. Sometimes I think that the top of the plant that she has on a stake that rises up above the 6-foot fence, I think I see a bird at the top of that. And then the light starts getting brighter, the sun starts coming up, and I realize it's just a leaf. It's not a bird. And then the bird comes. Then the hummingbird comes and sits on top of the leaf. Light reveals what's there. I see the flowers. I can see the details on the mountains to the south, the hummingbirds, and I can see the face of Bailey, my precious little dog. And she looks up at me as I'm petting her, and she begins to go. I know, it's just a growl of affection, that's all. This text that I just read, 1 Corinthians 4, is often used, and correctly so, to talk about how God's light reveals sin and corruption. But think about light. Pure light, I was taught by my art teacher, is the presence of all color. How do I know that? Well, you ever taken a prism and put it up to a beam of light? What comes through the other side of a prism? All kinds of colors, the colors of a rainbow. That's what a rainbow is. It's the light of the sun coming through raindrops that act as prisms, and they create this amazing display of God's beauty and creativity in the sky. All the colors of the rainbow. That's just light rays and different wavelengths of light. You see the rainbow of colors. You can see the purple in my shirt that somebody looked like something else because of the filters here. But you can see the purple in my shirt because of this quality of light to have that whole spectrum. And there are certain wavelengths of light present in the light beam that will pick those colors up. And I won't even get into how we perceive it because it has to do with the cones and the rods in our eyes and our abilities. And somebody said there's no such thing as color except that we see color. Well, I don't know. If a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound if nobody's around? Absolutely. Come on. Anyway, I'm not a physicist, but you get the point. The colors of God's grace are visible in the world through the light that is shined in our lives. I'd never really thought of it this way, but as I was thinking what Jesus said, how we're the light to the world in the qualities of light, I realize it's not just through our goodness that belongs to God. It's not just the love and the joy and the peace and the fruits of the Spirit that God shows His grace in our lives through, but it's also in our brokenness. It's also in our sorrow and in our loss. It's in our trouble and in our sin. Anywhere and any way that we allow God to work in our lives, the light of His grace shines through us to the world. Because guess what? We're really the same as everybody else. It's just we're asking God to help us. And the world sees that we're broken like they are and we have struggles like they do. But they see this God light shining through our lives and we become a light to the world. Even when we're in trouble. Even when we're in trouble. If our faith rises up to take hold of God. Even when we fail and we mess up, God's grace rainbow is being revealed through His children. Don't ever, ever, ever discount the power of God's light in your life. I don't care how low you get. I don't care how dark it gets. If you believe in Jesus, even if your faith is being tested, even if you can't see Him right now or you can't feel Him, don't doubt that God is there to show His light to the world around you through your life and through your struggle. God must just shake His head at us, and I'm talking about myself. How far down we can get, how discouraged and depressed and defeated we get, and we think that God has abandoned. God hasn't abandoned you or me if we have opened our heart to Him. He hasn't abandoned anybody, but especially those who have responded to His grace and said, Lord, I want you as my leader, as my Lord, as my director. as my Savior. So He is working through you. You just didn't know it. Don't discount it. Don't shy away from people in the world or from situations, because God's going to use it all. He's going to use it all. Third thing that light does is it wakes you up. Like driving in the car after a long night, and the light comes and I start waking up. And I begin to see the signs of where I can stop and get a good Starbucks to keep going. Arise, shine. Isaiah 60 verse 1 says, Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon you. We reflect His light. His light shines through us because it comes to us from Him. I really loved being in Oregon last week and having the sky start to light up around 4:30. You know, because when you go so far north, it gets light earlier. Of course, in the wintertime, it's the opposite. It stays dark until 10 o'clock in the morning. No, not that late. When the sun comes up, guess what? It's time to get up. Some of you haven't realized that yet. Some of you work all night, and it's time for you to go to bed, so that's okay. But some of you, you need to retrain your little internal clock to be a little more responsive to the way God made things to be. God gave me my wife to be my alarm clock. She gets up early before the sun comes up. In fact, our house up in Banning, I think to many of the neighbors around, if they were to be up at that time, it would look like the sun was inside of it because of the light coming up at 4 o'clock in the morning. Our presence in the world is a wake-up call for the world to greater and better things. It's an alarm clock to the world that God is alive and He's working and He's growing His kingdom. And that soon His kingdom will replace the kingdom of this world. You and I, just by being here, just by moving around and having relationships with people in the world, we're like God's alarm clock to the world. Because somewhere along the line, they're going to see something different in you and me. They are. If your faith is real at all. I used to operate, I think I've shared this before, but I used to operate, in 3 different places. Vegetarian restaurants earlier in my life. And one I worked at in San Diego, just out of college. A couple years later, that we started one in Orlando, Florida, and then later on in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And one of the most amazing things in my life is that every single place, completely removed in time and geographical location and circumstances, people would come in, and after they've come in, sometimes it was the first visit, sometimes it would be on the 3rd visit or whatever, and they would say, almost the same words, they'd say, I don't know what it is about this place, but there's something different here. And I guarantee you it wasn't the decor. We had used carpet on the floor. We had reclaimed wood, although that's in fashion now, reclaimed wood from the lumber company that was going to throw it away that we've made our booths and tables and counters out of, and stuff like that. No, it was the people, because in every situation we started these restaurants as a ministry. We started these restaurants to use food and flavor to open up people's conversation and hearts to Jesus Christ. And they would come in San Diego, in Orlando, in Myrtle Beach, years and miles apart, and they would say, I don't know what it is, but there's something different. And we would, like behind the scenes go, well, we know what it is. It's the Holy Spirit. But really what it was the presence of God's people in that place. Because everyone that would work in there were people who believed in Jesus. So I want to make a couple of observations about salt and light, and then we'll wrap it up and sing a song. First, Jesus used the metaphor of salt at a time when salt was extremely valuable. And He says, don't miss His words, and don't miss the cultural context here, because think of what I talked about, how people actually paid their monthly salary in salt. I read a story about, I think it was Marco Polo goes to China, and they'd actually minted salt coins, and the Chinese were, maybe it was the other way around, I don't know. But anyhow, they traded in salt. It's very valuable, and Jesus says, you are the salt of the earth. You are valuable. You're not only precious to God as His child, but you are of great worth in the work of God for the salvation of others. I've often read these verses with the idea that this is all about evangelism. We got to get out there and convince people. We got to get out there and get them into church. We got to get out there and help them understand the truth and all of that sort of thing. And I think that has a place, but I don't think that that's the primary meaning that Jesus is giving to this. He is saying, you are the salt of the earth. He doesn't say become the salt of the earth. There's nothing about you that is not part of God's plan or work. Yes, He is changing you and me. He is rooting out the selfishness in our hearts and establishing His selfless love in our lives. But even that process in and of itself is of great worth to God in His work in this world, His work of grace. You know, people pay thousands and thousands of dollars to go to seminars or attend universities or go to retreats so that they can change their lives. You can read all kinds of things on the internet about how can you change your mind so that you can become healthier and wealthier and better adjusted and have better relationships. You know what I'm talking about, right? Some of you have been to those seminars. Some of you have already paid and you're planning to go. And they're all good. But they pay thousands of dollars to become more productive and effective and more human. And God is doing a work in you and me that other people will envy if they see it. And you think that you're struggling? God's saying, no, you're not. You are my advertisement to the world. Don't allow anyone to make you less than, or to be unworthy, or to think of yourself as unworthy. If you are a believer and a follower of Jesus, well, you're like the song. Red and yellow, black and white, all are precious in His sight. Or we could say red and yellow and green and purple and blue and orange, all the colors of God's grace are at work in you. They make you precious to Him and valuable to the world. Well, I just mixed my metaphors. Talking about salt, we got to light. Let's get back to salt for a second. The second observation about salt is no good to anybody if it stays in the shaker. This is just a box of minerals. It's worthless. In fact, I think it only costs $1.50. Well, because it's a brand name, maybe $1.98. I don't know. If it doesn't get out of the box and into the shaker and out of the shaker and onto the food and from the food into your mouth or somebody's mouth, it's not good for anything. Well, the second truth applies to light as well. Light is no good if it isn't turned on or if it isn't uncovered. I have my trusty cell phone here. If you have a cell phone and you have this app on it, why don't you take it out and do what I'm going to do with you? There you go. Right? Come on. Just play along. I've always wanted to be up front and have people, Kumbaya, my Lord, Kumbaya. Yeah, see, you guys are getting into it. It's no good if it's off. Oh, it's still on. Wait. If it's off. No, but if I did this, people are like, you're crazy. What's wrong with you? But if you turn the light on, you start doing that, they go, oh, yeah. You know? It's no good if it's not turned on or if it's not uncovered. That's why Jesus said people don't light a lamp. You know, in Jesus' day, there wasn't electricity to light light bulbs. It was fire, forms of fire. If they don't light a lamp or they don't light a torch and then put something over it to cover it up, they light it so it'll lighten things up. A city set on a hill, he said, cannot be hid. I used to love when I was a kid, my dad would be driving out through the desert, and after a while you'd see all these lights off in the distance up against the hills. You could hardly see the hills or the mountains because it's all black, but these lights. And I would think, what's out there? Is that a factory? Does some hermit live out there? What is that? You know? Or you're flying over at night. You've done this, right? You're flying in a jet at night, and you look down and there's no clouds, and you see all these points of light. Jesus said, it doesn't do any good to cover the light up. He doesn't say you have to be salty. You have to make yourself season the world. He doesn't say you have to make your faith shine. He says you are salt. He says, let your light shine. It's His presence. It's His power that makes you salt and light in the world. And I don't care at what stage you are in your Christian walk. If you have faith, His light is in you. His salt is in you. Now there's just one more thing. We've mistaken the church for Jesus. We've elevated our idea of church to the point where it's actually become idolatry, I believe. We've replaced God in many instances with the house of God, or with the institution of God, or with the remnant chosen of God. If you don't get anything else, and I've said this probably 100 times in the years that I've been here, please get this. You and I, we are the church. We are the church. And whether you gathered in a group of 2 or 3 or 4, or whether you gathered here at North Hills in 100 to 200 people, we are the church. And as long as we put all of our energies and resources into building the institution or the buildings or buying the property or doing all the stuff, if we put all of our efforts into that, we're missing the point. We won't be able to be salt and light to the world. We don't just have the good news that's kept safely within the walls of this building, or within the books that we read, or within our subculture of Adventism. We don't just have the good news. You and I are the good news to the world. You don't know that. I don't really realize that most of the time, but I am the good news. So in my daily life, just interacting and moving around and being with people, God will use me. He will bring that good news to the world. He wants to tear down the idolatry of what we have allowed church to become. Do you know the first century? How did the church ever grow? The church ever grow without so many paid pastors? I'm not saying take my salary away. Not this month. Give me about 6 months to a year, so I can plan. But seriously, when you think about it, the church exploded because people were in love with a person, not with an institution. They were captivated by Jesus Himself. They saw the love that just poured out of Him. You think about Peter and his denial of Jesus, and he thought his life was over and Jesus was going to kick him off the team and maybe send him to hell or something. I don't know what was in his head. But Jesus just says, Peter, I love you. Feed my sheep. You become a leader. And through that horrible experience, God showed His light to the world. And we have this story today because it's such a significant one. We don't just have the good news. We are the good news. Don't get me wrong. I love this building. I love our setting and our campus. But it's just a place. You and I are the salt of the earth. You and I are the light of the world. God never meant for us to just clam up inside of a spiritual salt shaker. He meant for us to live our lives fully in the world around us, to preserve and to season and to bring healing and thirst. He wants our lives to push away the darkness and to reveal what's hidden, not only in the sin around us, but in the grace that God brings to this world. He wants to use you and me to wake up the world. Matthew 5:16. Let your light shine before men. It doesn't say make, it says let. It says let. It says let. I don't care who you don't have to have Bible knowledge. Maybe I've said it too much, but I want you to get it. You are, every one of you who believe in Jesus are part of God's incredible plan for the salvation of this world. Do you know how valuable you are? Let your light shine before men. What light? The light of God that saves people from eternal death and damnation. That's a big deal, folks. Let your light shine before men that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven. People say, well, if they see my good deeds, then it'll be all about me. Jesus didn't even give that a second thought. He says, when they see your good deeds, if they're truly good, they're going to glorify God because your good deeds come from God. They'll get it. They'll see it. They will glorify God when they see you living your life out in this world. I am so thankful that Jesus gave us stuff like this. And I'm so thankful that He makes me aware of it so that I can call you brothers and sisters. That we're all in this together. We're all trying to figure it out. And God is He's just constantly pulling us in. He's constantly giving us the awareness of how good and how great and how tasty and how bright He is. Amen?